A single mother paid for groceries with coins at a Walmart checkout. The billionaire standing right behind her looked into her cart and froze. It wasn't the coins. It wasn't the growing line. It wasn't the shame burning across her face. It was what he didn't see in that cart that broke something inside him. Because 27 years ago, a woman just like her had done the exact same thing in the exact same store, and that woman was his mother. 41-year-old Darius Kincaid hadn't cried since the day he buried her. Darius Kincaid was not the kind of billionaire who made headlines. He didn't tweet. He didn't do podcast interviews. He didn't stand on stages at tech conferences telling audiences how to hustle harder. He ran a $4.7 billion logistics empire from a corner office in downtown Boston, and most people who passed him on the street wouldn't have looked twice. That was by design. At 41, Darius was the sole owner and CEO of Kincaid Logistics Group, a freight and supply chain company that moved everything from medical equipment to fresh produce across 37 states. He built it from nothing. Not from a trust fund, not from a Stanford dorm room, not from a family connection that opened the first door. From a rusted box truck he'd bought at 23 with $3,200 borrowed from a credit union in Dorchester that almost didn't approve the loan because his credit score was 581 and his collateral was a handshake. That truck became 2 trucks. 2 became 6. 6 became a fleet. The fleet became a company. The company became an empire, and the boy from Dorchester became the man in the penthouse on Exeter Street in Back Bay, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charles River and a closet full of suits that cost more than his mother had earned in a year. His watch alone was worth $26,000, a Vacheron Constantin Overseas titanium case blue dial, the kind of timepiece that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. He wore it every day, not because he cared about watches, but because it was the first expensive thing he'd ever bought himself, and every time he glanced at it, he remembered what time used to mean when you were poor. Time meant shifts. Time meant bus schedules. Time meant how long until the lights got cut off. Darius didn't flaunt. He didn't own a yacht. He didn't throw parties. His driver, a retired Marine named Clyde, drove him in a black Maybach with tinted windows, but Darius sat in the back seat the way other men sat in waiting rooms. Quiet, still, somewhere else entirely. Because the truth about Darius Kincaid, the truth that no Forbes profile or Business Journal feature had ever captured, was that he hadn't enjoyed a single day of his wealth. Not one. Not the day the company crossed $1 billion in revenue. Not the day he bought the penthouse. Not the day Bloomberg called him one of the most influential black entrepreneurs in America. Every milestone arrived hollow like a package delivered to the wrong address, because the only person who would have made any of it matter was already gone. Lorraine Kincaid. His mother. She died 12 years ago. Congestive heart failure at 54 in a 1-bedroom apartment on Hancock Street in Dorchester, with $47 in her bank account and a refrigerator that held half a loaf of bread, a jar of mustard, and a gallon of milk she'd bought for a son who no longer lived. There, she died 3 years before Darius made his first $1 million. 3 years before he could have moved her anywhere, bought her anything, given her everything she'd spent a lifetime pretending she didn't need. 3 years too late. That math haunted him the way only permanent math can. The kind you can't renegotiate, can't restructure, can't solve with money or power or time. Lorraine had worked 2 jobs for as long as Darius could remember. Janitorial at a downtown office building from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Then prep cook at a soul food restaurant on Blue Hill Avenue from 4 until close. She came home smelling like pine sol and fryer grease. Her hands swollen, her back bent, her smile still somehow intact. And every night, no matter how late she walked through that door, she'd check on Darius in his bed, pull the blanket up to his chin, and whisper the same thing. "You eat first, baby. Mama already ate." She never ate first. Not once. Not in 18 years of raising him alone after his father left when Darius was 3. She'd serve him dinner, sit across the table, and drink water or coffee while he ate, pretending she'd already had something at the restaurant. He believed her until he was 12. Then he started noticing. The way she'd push food around a plate without lifting the fork. The way she'd wrap her portion in foil and put it in the fridge for him tomorrow. She gave everything she had and called it enough. She went without and called it fine. And she died before her son could give any of it back. That was the wound Darius carried. Not on his face, not in his voice, not in the way he ran his company with precision and discipline, but deep marrow, deep in the place where grief lives after it stops being sharp and becomes something worse, permanent. Every year, on March 14th, the anniversary of Lorraine's passing, Darius disappeared. His assistant Denise knew not to schedule meetings. Clyde knew not to bring the car. The office knew not to call. Darius. Because on that day Darius Kincaid stopped being a billionaire. He put on a gray hoodie that had survived since his 20s faded and pilled at the cuffs. He drove his old Honda Civic, a 2009 model, with 143,000 miles that he kept registered and insured and parked in a private garage for exactly this purpose. And he went home. Not to the penthouse. Home. Dorchester. He drove down Blue Hill Avenue with the windows cracked, letting in the March air that still carried winter's bite, past the barber shop where he got his first haircut, past the corner store where Lorraine sent him for milk on school mornings, past the bus stop where she stood every single day at 5:15 a.m. in shoes that were splitting at the sole because she'd spent the shoe money on his school supplies instead. He parked at Oak Lawn Cemetery and walked to Plot 47 Section C, a modest headstone, gray granite. Lorraine Marie Kincaid, beloved mother. He placed white chrysanthemums against the stone, the same ones every year, because Lorraine used to say they were the best flowers a poor woman could buy. Cheap, but they last. Like us, baby. He sat on the cold ground beside her grave and talked, told her about the company, about a new distribution center opening in Memphis, about the charity gala he'd attended where he felt like a fraud, about the emptiness that lived in rooms too expensive for her to have ever walked into. He talked until his voice went thin, and then he sat in silence until the cold made his knees ache. Then he drove to Walmart. Not any Walmart, the Walmart on Blue Hill Avenue, the one with the scratched linoleum floors and the fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency only people who'd spent too much time under them could hear. The one where Lorraine shopped every Thursday evening after her second shift. The one where Darius as a boy had walked the aisles beside her, watching her do math in her head at every shelf, calculating, subtracting, choosing between what he needed and what she could afford, which were never the same list. Every year Darius walked through this store. He didn't buy anything. He just walked. Past the cereal aisle where Lorraine always picked the yellow box of Cheerios because it was the cheapest per ounce. Past the produce section where she'd squeeze avocados she'd never buy and say maybe next week. Past the school supplies aisle where she'd let him pick one thing, just one, and he'd hold a box of crayons like it was treasure. He walked, and he remembered, and he left. 12 years of this ritual. 12 years of walking through a Walmart like a ghost visiting the living. But this year, something shifted. He stopped at the cereal aisle, reached up to the shelf, wrapped his fingers around a yellow box of Cheerios, 8.9 ounces, same brand, same size, same shelf position. He looked at it for a long time. Then he put it in a basket. It was the first thing he'd purchased in this store in 12 years. He walked to the checkout lanes, chose a regular line instead of self-checkout because Lorraine never trusted machines with money, and stood behind 2 other customers. His hoodie was pulled up, his Vacheron Constantine hidden under the sleeve. Nobody looked at him. Nobody recognized him. In Dorchester, in this Walmart, he was just another man holding a box of cereal. The line moved slowly. The person directly in front of him finished and left, and then Darius saw her. A woman, late 20s, maybe 30. Thin in a way that wasn't athletic, that came from skipping too many meals and pretending it was a choice. She wore a jacket too light for March in Boston, denim no lining, the zipper broken halfway up so it hung open at the collar. Her jeans were torn at the left knee. Not fashion. Wear. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, clean but dry, the kind of hair that hadn't seen conditioner in months. Her fingernails were trimmed, short filed even, but 3 of them were cracked down the middle. She'd given up on vanity, but not on dignity. Darius recognized that difference instantly, because his mother had lived inside it every day of her life. A boy stood beside her, maybe 7. Quiet still, his small hand gripping the fabric of her jacket near the hip like an anchor. He didn't fidget, he didn't ask for candy, he didn't look around. He watched his mother with the steady, serious eyes of a child who had learned too early that the world required paying attention. In the cart's fold-down seat, a smaller child slept. A girl, maybe 4 head, tilted against the plastic frame, a thumb hovering near her mouth, wearing a pink coat that was slightly too big, the sleeves rolled twice at the wrist. The woman unloaded her items onto the conveyor belt with careful, deliberate movements. Each item placed precisely, not tossed, not rushed. She was counting. Darius could see it in her lips. Micro-movements numbers running behind her eyes like a ticker. A woman who knew exactly how much she had and was making sure she didn't cross the line. The cashier, a heavy-set woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and a name tag that said Keisha, began scanning. The beeps came steady. Item after item. The total climbed on the small screen. 3142, 3618, 3991, 4112, 4372. Keisha read the total aloud. 4372. The woman reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a worn Ziploc bag. Then another. Then a third. 3 small plastic bags, each filled with coins. Quarters in one, dimes in another, nickels and pennies mixed in the third. She'd sorted them, counted them, organized them the night before with the precision of someone who treated every cent like a soldier in a war she was barely surviving. She opened the first bag and poured quarters onto the counter. They spread across the surface in a metallic whisper. Keisha looked at the coins, exhaled through her nose so softly, only someone watching closely would have noticed, and began counting. The line behind Darius grew. A man in a Red Sox cap shifted his weight and muttered something under his breath. A woman, 2 spots back, shook her head and pulled out her phone, the universal gesture of performed impatience. The mother didn't look up. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the second bag. Dimes scattered across the counter like tiny silver apologies. The boy beside her, the 7-year-old with the serious eyes, looked at his mother's shaking hands, then looked down at his shoes. He knew. Even at 7, he knew exactly what this moment cost her. Not in money. In something heavier than money. In the quiet currency of shame that poverty charges on every transaction. In front of $43.72 worth of groceries. In front of a growing line of strangers. In front of her children. This woman was paying for survival with pennies, and every coin that hit the counter sounded like an apology she shouldn't have had to make. Darius stood 2 spots back, his box of Cheerios in one hand, and watched. He wasn't impatient. He wasn't checking his phone. He was looking at the conveyor belt where her items sat waiting to be bagged. And for the first time, he actually saw what was there. A yellow box of Cheerios, 8.9 ounces. The same box, the same brand, the same shelf, the exact cereal he was holding in his own hand. A gallon of whole milk. A jar of peanut butter store brand, the kind with the white label and the plain font that says "We know you can't afford Jif." A loaf of white bread. A bag of apples, the small ones 5 pounds for $3.99, the cheapest option in produce. A 6-pack of juice boxes, fruit punch, the ones with the cartoon parrot on the front. Children's socks, size 7. A bottle of children's chewable vitamin C. 2 composition notebooks, wide ruled. A box of colored pencils, 12 count. And a bottle of children's cough syrup, grape flavor. Darius scanned the items again, then again. Then once more, slowly, the way a man reads a sentence that changes the meaning of everything before it. Every single item was for children. The cereal was for them. The milk was for them. The socks, the vitamins, the notebooks, the cough syrup, all of it. Every coin she was counting, every penny she was scraping from the bottom of a Ziploc bag was being spent on her kids. There was no shampoo, no deodorant, no razor, no lotion. No snack she might have wanted for herself, no meat, no protein of any kind that wasn't peanut butter, no coffee, no magazine, no lip balm, Nothing for her, not one thing. Darius looked at the woman again. The broken zipper, the thin jacket, the dry hair, the cracked nails. She was standing in a Walmart checkout line in March in Boston, where the wind cut through denim like it wasn't there, paying for her children's groceries, with coins she'd counted by hand the night before, and she hadn't spent a single cent on herself. He looked at the Cheerios in her cart, then at the Cheerios in his hand. Same box, same shelf, same store, 27 years apart. His mother's hands had done the same thing. On this same counter, with the same coins, buying the same cereal. For him. Never for herself, always for him. And the whole world had just stopped right there between the beep of a scanner and the clink of a dime hitting Formica, and Darius Kincaid could not move. He couldn't step forward, couldn't step back, couldn't breathe without something inside his chest threatening to come apart at the seams, something he'd spent 12 years welding shut with work and wealth and distance. Because this wasn't a stranger buying groceries. This was his mother. Standing right there, alive in a different woman's body, repeating the same sacrifice he'd been too young to stop and too late to repay. And the yellow box of Cheerios in his hand felt heavier than anything he'd ever held. Heavier than contracts, heavier than loss, heavier than the granite headstone he'd knelt beside an hour ago. The memory hit him like a fist to the sternum, not gradually, not in soft focus like they show in movies. It came all at once, whole and sharp and merciless, dragging him 27 years backward through time, while his body stayed rooted to the linoleum floor of a Walmart checkout line. He was 14, same store, same aisle, same fluorescent hum overhead, but the woman standing at the register wasn't a stranger. She was everything. Lorraine Kincaid was 36 years old and looked 50, not because she was aging badly, because exhaustion had a way of carving time into a woman's face faster than any calendar could. She worked 2 jobs, janitorial at the Prudential Tower downtown 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., scrubbing toilets and mopping floors in an office building where men in suits walked past her like she was furniture. Then, prep cook at Gigi's Soul Kitchen on Blue Hill Avenue 4 p.m. to close, peeling potatoes and chopping onions until her fingertips cracked and bled into the cutting board. She came home every night, smelling like bleach and cooking grease, her hands swollen, her lower back bent in a way that never fully straightened anymore. But she smiled, always. Like the pain was a secret she'd agreed to keep from the world as long as the world kept her son safe. Darius's father had walked out when Darius was 3. No note, no forwarding address, no child support. Just a man who decided that the weight of a family was heavier than the door he walked through. Lorraine never spoke about him. Not with anger, not with sadness, not with anything at all. She simply closed that chapter and carried the rest of the book on her own back. That Thursday evening in Walmart, Lorraine placed her items on the conveyor belt with the same careful precision Darius had just watched the woman in front of him use. Every item deliberate, every choice calculated. Cheerios, yellow box, 8.9 ounces. Whole milk, 1 gallon. Peanut butter store brand. White bread, a bag of small apples, the bruised ones on clearance because they were $1 cheaper. Children's socks, size 5. A bottle of children's cold medicine, because 14-year-old Darius had been coughing for 3 days and she'd been cutting her own doses of NyQuil in half to stretch it for him. Every item for him. Nothing for her. Not a bottle of lotion for the hands that cracked every winter. Not a box of tea for the headaches she never admitted she had. Not a single thing that existed solely because Lorraine Kincaid was a person who deserved things too. She paid in coins. Quarters first counted out in stacks of 4, then dimes, then nickels and pennies poured from a sandwich bag she'd folded neatly in her apron pocket. The cashier, a teenage girl who couldn't have been older than 16, counted slowly. The line behind them grew. Someone sighed. Someone shifted their weight with the theatrical impatience of a person who had never once worried about whether their debit card would clear. Lorraine didn't flinch. She stood straight, chin-level eyes forward, hands folded at her waist while the coins were counted. Dignity poured off her like armor. And Darius, 14 and old enough to understand, but too young to fix anything, stood beside her and felt something in his chest that he couldn't name then and still couldn't name now. Something between rage and reverence. Between wanting to burn the world down and wanting to build his mother a castle inside it. He watched her count coins and made a promise to himself that he would never let her do this again. That one day, he would hand her a credit card with no limit and tell her to buy everything she'd ever skipped, every lotion, every tea, every meal she'd pretended she'd already eaten. That one day, the woman who gave everything would finally receive something back. He was 27 years too late. Ma, he'd said that evening, walking to the car with plastic bags cutting into his fingers because he insisted on carrying all of them. "You didn't get anything for yourself," Lorraine smiled. She didn't look at him. She looked straight ahead, keys already in her hand, the smile of a woman who'd practiced this answer so many times it came out smooth as scripture. "Mama already ate, baby. Don't worry about Mama." She hadn't eaten. He knew that now. He'd known it since he was 16 when he started paying attention to the math. When SNAP ran out on the 23rd of the month, Lorraine switched to cash. And when the cash ran out 3 days later, she switched to nothing. Coffee in the morning. Free bread rolls from Gigi's, water from the tap. For 5, sometimes 7 days, she survived on air and willpower and the absolute refusal to let her son see hunger on her face. She never asked for help. Not from the government, not from neighbors, not from the church on the corner that ran a food pantry every Saturday. "We don't take handouts, Darius," she'd say, pressing his school shirt with an iron that had a frayed cord she refused to replace. "We figure it out." Pride was her weapon. Pride was also her cage. And she lived inside both, until her heart gave out at 54 in the apartment on Hancock Street, with $47 in her savings account and a refrigerator that held milk for a son who hadn't lived there in 6 years. 3 years before he made his first million. 3 years before he could have moved her anywhere, given her anything, told her she'd never have to count another coin as long as she lived. Darius stood in the checkout line at Walmart on Blue Hill Avenue, holding a box of Cheerios identical to the one his mother had bought 27 years ago, and watched a stranger count coins with the same trembling hands, the same straight spine, the same invisible armor of dignity wrapped around the same desperate math. And for the first time in 12 years, his eyes burned. Not because he was sad, because he was too late. Again, he knew the numbers. Every year, his company's charitable foundation published an annual report. Every year, Darius read it cover to cover, not because he cared about the PR, but because the data kept him honest. Kept him connected, at least on paper, to a world he'd climbed out of, but never truly left. 13 million children in America lived in food-insecure households. 13 million. That wasn't a typo. That wasn't a third-world statistic. That was here, in the richest country on earth. 13 million children who went to bed not knowing if breakfast was guaranteed. Single mothers were 5 times more likely to live below the poverty line than two-parent households. 5 times. Not 2, not 3, 5. And the average SNAP benefit, the government's answer to hunger, came out to roughly $6.30 per person per day. That was $2.10 per meal. $2.10 to feed a child breakfast, lunch, and dinner, in a country where a medium coffee at Starbucks cost more than that. And here was the part that most people never saw: SNAP benefits ran out. They were calculated monthly, distributed on a fixed schedule, and for millions of families, the math simply didn't stretch. By the 3rd or 4th week, the card was empty. The balance hit 0. And whatever gap remained between government assistance and actual survival had to be filled with something else. Side jobs, borrowed money, skipped meals, coins counted on a kitchen table at midnight by a mother too tired to sleep but too determined to quit. That was what Tamara was doing right now. Darius could see it with a clarity that cut through every quarterly report and philanthropic summary he'd ever read. This wasn't data. This was a woman standing 6 feet in front of him, paying for her children's groceries with sorted coins because the system had done the math and decided her family wasn't worth another 31 days of food. His mother had never applied for food stamps. Never once. "We don't take handouts, Darius." She'd said it like a mantra, like a prayer, like a shield she held up against a world that already thought less of her for being poor and black and alone. She filled the gap with overtime shifts and free restaurant scraps and the kind of creative hunger management that no one teaches in school but every poor mother learns by instinct. And this woman, this stranger in the broken zipper jacket, wasn't using an EBT card either. She was paying in coins. The same pride, the same refusal, the same quiet war fought with pennies instead of weapons. Darius stood behind her and felt the full weight of what it meant to know a statistic and then watch it breathe. The coins came up short. Keisha had counted everything twice. 3 Ziploc bags emptied every quarter, and dime and nickel and penny spread across the counter like a battlefield of copper and silver. The total was $43.72. The coins added up to $40.55, $3.17 short. Tamara stared at the total on the screen, then at the items still sitting on the conveyor belt. Her face didn't crumble, it tightened. The muscles around her jaw pulled inward, the kind of tension that comes from years of practicing composure in front of your children, the kind of mask that only a mother could hold in place while her stomach dropped through the floor. Her eyes moved across the belt. Cheerios, milk, peanut butter, bread, apples, juice, socks, vitamins, notebooks, colored pencils, cough syrup. She reached for the colored pencils, a 12-count box, $2.47. If she put those back, she'd still be short, but closer. Her hand hovered over them the way you hover over something that belongs to your child, knowing that pulling it away is a wound you'll carry longer than they will. A small voice broke the silence. Not loud, barely above a whisper. "It's okay, Mama. I don't need those." Micah, 7 years old. Standing beside his mother with his hand still gripping the hem of her jacket, his serious brown eyes looking up at her with an understanding that no 7-year-old should possess. He'd seen the math on the screen. He'd watched his mother reach for the pencils. And he'd done the calculation himself, not in numbers, but in the only currency a child understands. His mother's face, her jaw, her eyes, the way her breathing changed when things got tight. He didn't need the pencils. He needed her to stop looking like that. Darius heard the boy's voice, and something inside his chest folded in half. Not cracked, not broke, folded. Like a piece of paper that had been holding its shape for 12 years and finally couldn't anymore. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. He didn't run the decision through the filter of logic or consequence or self-protection that governed every other choice in his $4.7 billion life. He stepped forward. He placed his box of Cheerios on the conveyor belt right next to hers and looked at Keisha. "Ring it all together. I've got it." Tamara turned around. Not fast, not startled, slow. The way a woman who's been surprised too many times by bad news turns to face whatever's coming next. She looked at Darius. Gray hoodie. No watch visible. No wallet flash. Just a man with tired eyes holding nothing but a box of yellow cereal. Her expression wasn't grateful. It wasn't angry. It was guarded, layered, the face of someone who'd learned that kindness from strangers almost always came with a price. "Sir, I don't need charity." The words came out steady, practiced. She'd said them before, probably to social workers, probably to concerned neighbors, probably to herself every morning when she looked in the mirror and decided that today, like every other day, she would handle it alone. Darius looked at her. He didn't smile. He didn't reassure. He just said quiet enough that only she and Keisha could hear. "It's not charity. My mama used to buy the same Cheerios from this same store. I figured the least I could do is finish what she started." Tamara blinked. The sentence didn't make sense to her, he could see that. But something in his voice did. Something behind the words that wasn't pity, wasn't performance, wasn't the hollow generosity of a man trying to feel good about himself. It was pain. Raw, lived-in, familiar pain. The kind that one person recognizes in another, the way veterans recognize each other across a crowded room. She didn't say anything else. She watched him pull out a debit card, plain navy blue, no platinum edges, no raised numbers. Nothing that whispered wealth. He swiped it. The screen flashed approved. $47.19. Keisha bagged the groceries without comment, her eyes moving between Darius and Tamara with the quiet awareness of someone who'd been behind that register long enough to know that some moments didn't need narration. "Thank you." Tamara's voice was small, fractured at the edges like glass held together by surface tension alone. She picked up the bags. Micah grabbed the one with the cereal and the pencils, clutching it against his chest like he'd been given a gift and was afraid someone might take it back. Darius nodded. He didn't offer his name, didn't ask for hers, didn't reach for a business card or a phone number or any of the gestures that would have turned this moment into something transactional. He just stepped aside and let them walk past. He should have left. The ritual was over. The Walmart visit, the cemetery, the Cheerios, all of it complete. The logical, disciplined part of his brain, the part that had built an empire by knowing when to walk away, told him to go home. Back to the penthouse. Back to the silence. Back to the calendar that would fill tomorrow with meetings about freight contracts and distribution routes and quarterly earnings projections. But his feet didn't move. Because he was watching Tamara walk toward the exit, Micah holding her hand on one side, Zuri still asleep in the cart on the other. And just before she pushed through the automatic doors, Tamara stopped. She knelt down beside Micah, leaned close to his ear, and whispered something. Darius couldn't hear the words. He was too far away. But he knew them. He knew them the way you know the lyrics to a song your mother sang every night of your childhood. He knew them the way you know the shape of a wound you've carried so long it's become part of your skeleton. He followed them to the parking lot. Not close, not obvious. 3 rows of cars between them, enough distance to be invisible, close enough to hear if the wind cooperated. Tamara opened the rear door of a Honda Civic, 2003 faded silver. A dent in the passenger side door, one tail light held in place with red tape. She lifted Zuri gently from the cart and placed her in a car seat that had seen better years. The buckle clicked. Zuri didn't stir. Micah climbed into the back seat and buckled himself in. He looked at the Walmart bags on the seat beside him, then looked at his mother standing outside the door. "Mama, can we eat the crackers now? I'm hungry." Tamara reached into the bag, pulled out a sleeve of saltine crackers, handed them through the open door. Micah took them, tore the plastic bit into one. Crumbs fell on his jacket. He chewed for a moment, then held the sleeve toward her. "You want some?" And Tamara Osei, 29 years old, standing in a Walmart parking lot on Blue Hill Avenue, in a jacket that couldn't keep out March, looked at her son with a smile that had been passed down through generations of women who loved harder than they lived, and said the 5 words that stopped Darius Kincaid's heart. "Mama already ate, baby. You go ahead." Darius was standing 3 parking spaces away, his hand on the hood of his Honda Civic, the wind carrying her voice across the asphalt like it had been aimed directly at the center of his chest. Mama already ate. The same words, the same cadence, the same lie wrapped in the same love, delivered with the same smile that didn't reach the eyes because the stomach behind it was empty and had been empty since yesterday, maybe the day before, maybe longer. The same performance a million mothers had given in a million parking lots across a million versions of this exact moment, choosing hunger over honesty, because honesty would mean admitting to a 7-year-old that the world had failed them both. Darius put both hands on the hood and lowered his head. The metal was cold under his palms. The parking lot was loud with carts and engines and the distant beep of a truck backing up. But all he could hear was that voice, hers, and underneath it layered, like a ghost track on an old recording, his mother's. "Mama already ate, baby. Don't worry about Mama." 12 years of held-together composure cracked open in a Walmart parking lot at 4:17 in the afternoon on March 14th. He didn't sob. He didn't make a sound. But tears ran down his face, and his hands shook against the hood, and the box of Cheerios he'd set on the roof of his car sat there catching the late afternoon light like a small yellow monument to everything he'd lost, and everything he was looking at right now. He watched the silver Honda pull out of the space, watched it turn left toward the exit, watched the brake lights blink red at the stop sign before it merged onto Blue Hill Avenue and disappeared into traffic. He pulled his phone from his hoodie pocket. His hands were still shaking when he dialed. Denise picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Kincaid." I thought today was your... I need you to do something for me. His voice was steady enough to function, but Denise had worked for him for 9 years. She heard the fractures underneath. What do you need? A background check. Not criminal, situational. Employment history, housing status, family structure, medical education, everything. I need it by tomorrow morning. Whose? Darius looked at the empty parking space where the Honda had been. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she lived. He had nothing except a license plate number he'd read while standing 3 spaces away with tears on his face. He gave Denise the plate number. Then he said, "And Denise, this stays between us, of course." He hung up and stood in the parking lot for a long time. The sun was dropping behind the buildings on Blue Hill Avenue, painting the Walmart facade in the same orange light that used to come through the kitchen window of the apartment on Hancock Street while his mother stood at the stove, reheating whatever was left from Gigi's pretending she'd already had her share. His mother's voice came to him then. Not the lie. The truth. Something she'd said once late at night when she thought he was asleep sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and the electric bill open in front of her. The hardest thing about being poor isn't the hunger, baby. It's pretending you're not hungry so your child doesn't worry. Darius Kincaid stood in a parking lot in Dorchester and watched the sky go dark and felt for the first time in 12 years that his mother was trying to tell him something, not from beyond the grave. Not in some mystical way, but through the woman who'd just driven away with 2 children and an empty stomach and 3 words that had outlived the woman who first spoke them. Mama already ate. He got in the Honda, sat behind the wheel, didn't start the engine, just sat there watching his breath fog the windshield, thinking about his mother, about the stranger, about the yellow box of cereal sitting on his passenger seat like a bridge between 2 women who'd never met but had lived the exact same life, 27 years apart. He was going to find her, not to give her money, not to be a hero, not to prove anything to anyone, but because his mother had spent her whole life pretending she wasn't hungry and she died before anyone could sit her down and say, "You matter, you're seen, you don't have to carry this alone." He couldn't save Lorraine. She was gone. But the woman in the parking lot wasn't. Not yet. And Darius Kincaid, who'd built a $4.7 billion company on logistics, on the science of getting the right thing to the right place at the right time, finally understood what that skill was actually for. Denise sent the file at 11:14 p.m., 2 days of digging, 48 hours of pulling public records, cross-referencing addresses, and building a profile from the kind of data that exists in government databases, but rarely gets read by anyone who could actually do something about it. Darius opened the email on his laptop in the penthouse. The city glowed through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. The Charles River was black and still reflecting the lights of Cambridge on the far bank. His coffee had gone cold 2 hours ago. He hadn't noticed. Tamara Na Osei, 29 years old, born in Roxbury, Massachusetts. Mother Abena Osei emigrated from Accra, Ghana in 1989. Father Jerome Osei, American-born, left the family when Tamara was 5. No forwarding address. No child support paid. Last known location somewhere in Florida. Last contact never. Darius read that line twice. His own father had left when he was 3. Last known location nowhere that mattered. Last contact, a door closing, and a silence that lasted a lifetime. Tamara's mother Abena worked as a nursing aide at a long-term care facility in Mattapan for 22 years. She died 6 years ago. Complications from type 2 diabetes. She was 53. She left behind no estate, no savings, no life insurance. Just a daughter and 2 grandchildren she'd helped raise between double shifts and insulin injections that she sometimes skipped because the copay was $14, and $14 was a gallon of milk, a loaf of bread, and bus fare for a week. Lorraine Kincaid had died at 54. Congestive heart failure. $47 in her account, 1 year apart in age, $1 apart in savings. 2 women who'd never met living the same life in different zip codes dying the same way for the same reason, not from disease, From the accumulation of years spent putting everyone else first and themselves last until their bodies simply couldn't carry the weight anymore. Darius closed his eyes, opened them, kept reading. Tamara graduated from Madison Park Technical Vocational High School with a 3.7 GPA. She was accepted into the licensed practical nursing program at Bunker Hill Community College on a partial scholarship. She completed 3 semesters, top of her clinical rotation. Instructors noted her as exceptional. The word actually appeared in her academic file underlined. Then she got pregnant. She was 22. The father, a man named Jamal, whose last name appeared nowhere in Tamara's records because he'd disappeared so thoroughly, it was as if he'd been erased from the system entirely, promised to stay, promised to help, promised to be there when the baby came. 4 months after Micah was born, Jamal was gone. Same story, same door, same silence. Tamara withdrew from Bunker Hill, not because she wanted to, because there is no affordable childcare for a newborn in Boston. If you don't have family, don't have a partner, don't have savings, and don't have the kind of safety net that wealthy people assume everyone has, they've never had to live without one. She took 2 jobs, prep cook at a restaurant on Dudley Street 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., cleaning crew at an office building in the financial district 5 p.m. to midnight. Between shifts, she picked up Micah from a neighbor who watched him for $40 a week, fed him, bathed him, read to him, put him to bed, and left for the second job before he woke up from his nap. Darius recognized the schedule. It was his mother's schedule, almost hour for hour, prep cook during the day, cleaning crew at night. The same split shift that left you smelling like 2 different kinds of exhaustion and sleeping in a chair because you only had 3 hours before the alarm went off and you had to become a different kind of tired. Tamara's current apartment was a studio on Geneva Avenue. 380 square feet, $1,150 a month. That was roughly 70% of her take-home pay. She received SNAP benefits for the children, but not for herself. Zuri attended a state-subsidized daycare. Micah was enrolled in 2nd grade at the Kenny Elementary School, but the after-school program cost $120 a month and Tamara couldn't cover it. So Micah went home at 3:30 every afternoon and sat alone in the apartment until Tamara returned at 6, sometimes 6:30, sometimes later if the bus ran behind schedule. A 7-year-old boy, alone, for 2.5 hours every day. Because his mother couldn't afford the program that would keep him supervised and safe, and the system that was supposed to catch children like Micah had too many children to catch and not enough hands to hold them. Darius closed the laptop. The screen went dark. The penthouse went quiet. He sat in the leather chair that cost more than Tamara's annual rent and stared at the skyline he'd once been so proud of owning a piece of. But he didn't see the skyline. He saw Hancock Street. He saw the apartment with the peeling linoleum and the radiator that clanked all winter. He saw his mother walking through the door at 11 at night, her hands swollen and cracked, opening the refrigerator, finding the last slice of bread and putting it on a plate for him tomorrow, then closing the door, going to bed empty. Tamara Osei was living his mother's life. The same jobs, the same math, the same lie at the dinner table, and if no one did anything, she would die the same way. Alone at 50-something in a small apartment, with nothing in the bank, and everything she ever had already given away to children who would spend the rest of their lives wishing they'd known sooner. If this story is hitting you, subscribe for more like this. Now, let's continue. The following Thursday, Darius drove the Honda Civic back to the Walmart on Blue Hill Avenue. Same hoodie, same jeans, same deliberate invisibility. He parked in the same lot, walked through the same entrance, and did the one thing a man worth $4.7 billion had never done in his professional life. He gambled. He was betting that Tamara Osei shopped on a schedule, that a woman who counted coins into Ziploc bags and knew the exact price of every item before it hit the conveyor belt was the kind of person who bought groceries on the same day at the same time every week because unpredictability was a luxury she couldn't afford. He walked past the pharmacy section, past the cleaning supplies, past the seasonal display of discounted Valentine's candy that nobody had bought, and turned into the dairy aisle. She was there. Standing in front of the refrigerated case, with a gallon of whole milk in one hand and a half-gallon in the other, her eyes moving between the price tags like a calculator, running a program she'd memorized long ago, Micah stood beside her, holding the edge of the cart. Zuri was in the fold-down seat, awake, this time chewing on the ear of a stuffed rabbit that had seen better decades. Darius approached from the far end of the aisle. Slow, casual. The body language of a man who happened to be in the same store, not a man who'd read a 40-page report about her life 2 nights ago. "Excuse me. I think we met last week. At the register." Tamara looked up. Recognition came fast. Not warmth, not relief, caution. The measured, practiced wariness of a woman who had learned that people who showed up twice usually wanted something. Then Micah saw him. The boy's face changed. Not a smile exactly, but something close. The softening that happens when a child recognizes someone who was kind to his mother in a moment when the world wasn't. "You're the Cheerios man," Micah said. Darius almost laughed. Almost. It caught in his chest like a hiccup, the sound of surprise mixed with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Delight, pure, unexpected delight. He'd been called Mr. Kincaid by investors, Sir by employees, Darius by exactly 2 people in his life, both of whom were dead. But Cheerios man. That was new. "I am," he said. "That's me." Tamara put the milk back. The gallon. She kept the half-gallon. The cheaper option. The math never stopped, even mid-conversation. "I wanted to say thank you again," she said carefully. "For what you did. You didn't have to. I know I didn't." Silence. The fluorescent hum of the dairy case filled the space between them. Darius knelt down slow, like a man who'd learned from his mother that the fastest way to earn a woman's trust was to speak to her children first. "Hey, Micah, what grade are you in?" Second Micah said. "At Kenny Elementary. On Glenway, you know it. I used to walk past it every day. My school was 3 blocks over." Micah studied him with those serious brown eyes. "Did you walk by yourself every day?" Something passed between them. A recognition that only 2 people who'd grown up in the same neighborhood and the same kind of alone could understand. Darius stood and looked at Tamara. "Can I buy you and the kids lunch? There's a diner 2 blocks from here. My mom used to take me there after shopping." Tamara's jaw tightened. The instinct to refuse was visible, physical, like a wall being built in real time between his offer and her pride. He'd seen the same wall in his mother 1,000 times. The architecture of dignity in a world that offered help like a transaction and expected gratitude like a receipt. "It's just lunch," Darius said quietly. "No agenda, no strings, just pancakes and bad coffee." Micah looked up at his mother. He didn't beg. He didn't plead. He just looked with the hope of a child who'd learned to keep his wants small so they'd fit inside what his mother could carry. Tamara exhaled. "Okay, just lunch." The diner was called Gigi's. Not the original. The original had closed 8 years ago, when the owner retired. But the new owner kept the name, kept the menu, kept the booth by the window that Lorraine used to slide into every other Thursday evening after shopping when she'd saved enough that week to buy Darius a short stack of pancakes and pretend she'd already eaten. Darius didn't tell Tamara any of this. He just held the door open and let them walk through. Micah slid into the booth and immediately opened the laminated menu, scanning the pictures with the intensity of a boy who didn't eat at restaurants often enough for it to feel ordinary. "Can I get pancakes?" he asked, looking at Tamara, not Darius, because he knew who paid for things in his world. "Order whatever you want," Darius said before Tamara could calculate the price. Zuri pointed at a picture on the kids' menu. "The yellow one," she declared. "Eggs sunny side up." She didn't know the name. She knew the color. 4 years old and already fluent in the language of choosing things by sight because nobody had taught her the words yet. Tamara ordered coffee, just coffee, black, nothing else. Darius looked at her across the table. "You're not eating." She wrapped both hands around the mug like a woman trying to absorb warmth through ceramic. "I'm fine. I already." She stopped. The sentence hung in the air between them, half-formed the first two words of a lie she'd told 1,000 times to 1,000 people in 1,000 variations. I already ate. I'm not hungry, I had something at work. The universal language of mothers who'd perfected the art of disappearing their own hunger so thoroughly that it became invisible even to themselves. But she couldn't finish it. Not here. Not in front of this man who'd paid for her groceries with a box of Cheerios and a sentence about his mother that still echoed in her head a week later. Something in his eyes when he'd said it. Something that told her he knew. The second half of that sentence, the part she never said out loud, the part that went, I already ate, which means I didn't eat, which means I won't eat until tomorrow, which means the math works out, and my children never have to know. Darius didn't wait for her to finish. He flagged the waitress. 2 short stacks, please. 1 for the gentleman here, and 1 for her. He nodded toward Tamara. Same thing. Butter and syrup. Tamara opened her mouth to protest. My mom used to say the same thing, Darius said quietly. His voice wasn't preachy. It wasn't pitying. It was the voice of someone pulling a thread they'd carried for decades. I'm fine. I already ate. Don't worry about me. She said it every single day. Took me 25 years to figure out she was lying every time. Tamara stared at him. Her lips pressed together. Her eyes glistened, not with tears exactly, but with the kind of moisture that rises when someone says out loud the thing you've been hiding underwater for so long you forgot it was there. The pancakes arrived. Micah attacked his with the unself-conscious joy of a 7-year-old who had temporarily forgotten that the world was complicated. Zuri poked her eggs with a fork, fascinated by the way the yolk ran across the plate like liquid gold. Tamara looked at the pancakes in front of her. Stacked. Buttered. Warm. She picked up the fork slowly, like someone who'd forgotten the weight of eating without calculating who else needed to eat first. She took a bite, chewed, swallowed, and for a moment, just a moment, the tightness in her shoulders loosened, and she looked like a woman who was simply eating breakfast instead of a woman performing the endless calculus of sacrifice. She told him about the nursing program, not because he asked, because the pancakes had done something that a week of sleepless nights couldn't. They'd made her feel for 11 minutes in a vinyl booth, like a person instead of a system. She told him she'd been 3 semesters into the LPN program at Bunker Hill, top of her clinical rotation. Instructors had used the word exceptional. She told him about the pregnancy, about Jamal, about the withdrawal, about the 2 jobs, about Micah coming home to an empty apartment every afternoon, because after school cost $120 a month, and $120 a month was 4 days of groceries. She didn't tell it like a tragedy. She told it like a list. Calm, matter of fact. The way you describe a problem you've stared at for so long it's lost its emotional charge and become just another wall you walk around every day. But Darius heard the charge underneath. He heard the dream that had been folded and placed in a drawer so deep she'd almost forgotten which drawer it was in. What would you do, he asked, if you could go back to school? Tamara stopped chewing. She looked at him with an expression he'd seen before on the faces of people in boardrooms when someone asked a question that changed the shape of the entire conversation. I'd finish my nursing license. The answer came immediately. No pause, no calculation, no weighing of probability or practicality. It came the way truth comes when it's been held captive, and someone finally opens the door. I'd finish my LPN. Then I'd work toward my RN. I want to be in community health clinics, the ones in neighborhoods like this, where people can't afford to get sick, but can't afford not to. Darius looked at her. 29 years old, 2 children, 2 jobs, a 380-square-foot apartment, and a dream she'd kept alive for 7 years on nothing but willpower and memory. She hadn't buried it. She'd just run out of hands to carry it. Okay, he said. Let me make a phone call. Tamara's face shifted. Not hope. Not yet. Something before hope. The careful, guarded look of someone who'd been disappointed enough times to know that wanting something was the fastest way to lose it. I don't need a handout, she said. The same words from the checkout line. The same spine. I know, Darius said. That's not what this is. He called Denise from the parking lot while Tamara buckled the kids into the Honda. His voice was calm, controlled the CEO voice that made things happen in rooms he wasn't standing in. I need you to pull the scholarship database at Bunker Hill Community College. There's a program called Second Chance. It's for women returning to education after an interruption. I need to know the eligibility requirements, the application deadline, and whether a 29-year-old single mother with 3 completed semesters and a 3.7 GPA would qualify. Denise was quiet for exactly 1 second. You already know the answer. I need them to know it too. Kincaid Logistics Group had donated $2 million to Bunker Hill 3 years prior, part of a workforce development initiative. Darius had championed specifically because community colleges were the only on-ramp that people like his mother ever had access to. He'd never imagined that the money he'd given to an institution would one day create a path for a specific woman he'd meet in a checkout line. But life, as his mother used to say, has a longer memory than we give it credit for. Denise called back within an hour. The Second Chance Scholarship covered tuition, books, and clinical fees for qualifying candidates. Tamara qualified. She had always qualified. The scholarship had been available the entire time she'd been scrubbing office floors at midnight. She just didn't know it existed because no one in her orbit had ever told her, and the system that was supposed to connect people to resources had too many people and not enough connectors. That was the thing about poverty that data never captured and policy papers always missed. It wasn't just a lack of money, it was a lack of information, an asymmetry that kept the doors locked, not because they were sealed, but because nobody ever told you where the handle was. Darius called Tamara that evening. She picked up on the 4th ring. Her voice wary guarded the voice of a woman who didn't give her number to people lightly and was already regretting that she had. I found something, Darius said. It's not charity. It's a scholarship you already qualified for. Someone just needed to tell you it existed. Silence on the line. Then, what kind of scholarship? Nursing. At Bunker Hill. Full tuition. Books. Everything. It's called Second Chance. It was designed for exactly your situation. More silence. Longer this time. Darius could hear Zuri babbling in the background. The sound of a television turned low. The hum of a radiator that probably worked half the time. Why are you doing this? Tamara asked. And for the first time, the question wasn't suspicious. It was genuine. The question of someone standing at the edge of something she'd been staring at from the other side for 7 years. Because my mother spent her entire life qualifying for things no one ever told her about, Darius said. And by the time I had the resources to find them for her, she was already gone. He didn't let the silence sit too long. He had more. Micah. There's a Boys and Girls Club on Bowdoin Street that runs a free after-school program. Homework, help, snacks, supervised activities until 6:30. No cost. He can start Monday. He heard Tamara's breathing change, the quickening of someone whose chest had been compressed for so long that the first full breath felt like pain. And your housing. You're paying $11.50 a month for 380 square feet. You qualify for a Section 8 voucher. You always have. The waitlist in Boston is long, but there's an expedited track for single parents enrolled in education programs. Denise, my assistant, she's already started the paperwork. If you want her to. Tamara didn't speak for a long time. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper, fractured and raw, and holding onto the edge of something that might have been the beginning of belief. You're telling me these things were there this whole time? Yes. And nobody told me. Nobody told my mother either. That's the part that keeps me up at night. What Darius learned in the weeks that followed wasn't just about Tamara. It was about the architecture of poverty itself, the invisible infrastructure that kept millions of people locked in survival mode, while the keys to their own doors hung just out of reach in filing cabinets they didn't know existed. Denise had become his research partner without either of them naming it that. She'd been his assistant for 9 years, managed his calendar, his travel, his professional life with surgical precision. But this was different. This was personal, and Denise knew it because she'd grown up in Mattapan herself, 3 zip codes from Tamara's apartment, and she recognized the terrain. She's receiving SNAP, Denise told him, during a call that was supposed to be about a shipping contract but had veered somewhere more important. But she's not on WIC. Women, Infants and Children. It's a separate federal program. Covers milk, cereal, eggs, fruits, vegetables, peanut butter, specifically for mothers with children under 5. Zuri qualifies. Tamara qualifies. It would save her $60 to $80 a month on groceries. Why isn't she on it? Because nobody told her. The programs don't talk to each other. SNAP is administered through one office, WIC through another. There's no system that flags a family and says, hey, you're eligible for this other thing too. You have to know it exists. Find the office, fill out a separate application, provide separate documentation, and show up during business hours, which for a woman working 2 jobs is essentially impossible. Darius leaned back in his chair. $4.7 billion, and the thing that made him angriest wasn't a business competitor or a failed acquisition. It was a filing cabinet. The housing situation was worse. Tamara was paying $1,150 a month for 380 square feet. She qualified for Section 8, the federal Housing Choice Voucher program that subsidized rent for low-income families. But the waiting list in Boston averaged 27 months. 27 months of paying 70% of your income for a studio apartment, while a bureaucracy processed paperwork at the speed of indifference. There's an expedited track, Denise said, for single parents enrolled in approved education or workforce programs. If Tamara starts the nursing program, she moves up the list. Significantly. How significantly? 6 to 9 months instead of 27. Every piece of the puzzle connected to every other piece. The scholarship enabled the education enabled the expedited housing, the housing freed up income, the income stabilized the family, the stability allowed the children to thrive. It was a chain, and every link existed already. Every program was funded, operational, available. The only thing missing was the connector. The person who could see the whole chain at once and say, here, this is how the pieces fit. The system isn't broken, Darius said to Denise that night, standing at his window, watching the lights of Boston flicker like a circuit board designed by someone who'd never lived in the dark. It's designed to be hard to navigate. And the people who need it most are the ones with the least time to figure it out. Tamara started classes at Bunker Hill Community College on a Tuesday in April. Night session 6:30 to 9:45, 3 evenings a week. The Second Chance Scholarship covered tuition, books, and clinical fees. She wore the same jeans she'd worn to Walmart, but she'd ironed them. She carried a backpack Micah had decorated with stickers from the after-school program at the Boys and Girls Club on Bowdoin Street, where he now went every afternoon until 6:30, instead of sitting alone in the apartment, counting the minutes until his mother came home. Zuri's daycare extended her hours through a supplemental voucher Denise had helped Tamara apply for. It added 90 minutes to the end of the day, which didn't sound like much until you understood that 90 minutes was the difference between making it to class and not. The first week, Tamara sat in the back row of the anatomy lecture hall and didn't speak. She took notes in a spiral notebook she'd bought at the dollar store, writing small and tight to make the pages last. The professor, a woman in her 50s, named Dr. Adaise Nwosu, taught with the kind of clarity that made complex systems feel like stories. The nervous system was a highway. The circulatory system was a river delta. The skeletal system was architecture. Tamara understood architecture. She'd been building and rebuilding her own life structure for 7 years with materials that kept breaking. By the second week, she raised her hand in class for the first time. By the third week, she answered a question the rest of the room couldn't. By the fourth week, Dr. Nwosu pulled her aside after lecture. "You learn like someone who's been waiting for this," the professor said. Tamara looked at her. "I have been. 7 years." Dr. Nwosu nodded the nod of a woman who recognized hunger that had nothing to do with food. "Don't waste it." Darius stayed in the background. He didn't visit the campus. He didn't attend classes. He didn't insert himself into the daily rhythm of a life that wasn't his. He called Tamara every 2 weeks, short calls, 10 minutes, 12 at the most. "How are the kids? How's the program? Do you need anything?" The answer to the last question was always no, and Darius respected that because he knew it meant she was building something she could stand on by herself, and the worst thing he could do was make her dependent on someone else's floor. Sometimes, a package arrived at her apartment from Amazon. a used copy of Tabor's Cyclopedic Medical Dictionary, a set of colored highlighters, a pocket-sized anatomy flashcard set, no note, no return name, just a shipping label from a warehouse in Kentucky. Tamara knew who it was. She didn't mention it. Neither did he. The building on Geneva Avenue began to change around her. Not physically. The walls were still thin. The radiator still clanked. The hallway still smelled like cooking oil and carpet cleaner. But the ecosystem shifted. Jewel Patterson lived in apartment 312, one floor above Tamara. 68 years old, retired from the Boston public school system after 31 years as a cafeteria worker with knees that ached when it rained, and a television that stayed on all day because the silence bothered her more than the noise. She'd watched Tamara come and go for 2 years. Watched her rush down the hallway with Zuri on one hip and a bag over the other shoulder. Watched her come home at midnight, fumbling with keys, her back bent like a woman twice her age. One Tuesday evening, as Tamara was strapping Zuri into the car seat and trying to calculate whether she had enough gas to get to campus and back, Jewel appeared in the doorway of the building. "Give me the baby," she said. Not a question, an instruction. The kind of sentence that comes from a woman who raised 4 children of her own and had no patience for logistics that could be solved by a willing pair of arms. Tamara froze. "Miss Jewel, I can't ask you to." "You didn't ask. I'm telling. Give me the child. Go to school. She'll be asleep in 20 minutes, and I'll be watching my shows. Bring her up when you get home." Tamara's eyes filled. She didn't argue. She handed Zuri to Jewel, who settled the girl against her shoulder with the practiced ease of someone who'd held 1,000 children and walked back inside, humming a song that sounded like something from a church Tamara had never attended, but somehow recognized. From that night on, Jewel watched Zuri every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. She never asked for money. Tamara tried once, and Jewel looked at her the way Odette Thibodeau would have looked at someone trying to pay for kindness. "Child, I spent 30 years feeding other people's children for $8.40 an hour. This one I feed for free." Micah, for his part, started carrying Jewel's trash down to the dumpster without being asked. Every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork. He'd knock on her door at 6:15, take the bag, disappear down the stairs, and come back with his hands empty and his chin up. 7 years old and already fluent in the only language of gratitude that mattered: action. Tamara brought homemade banana bread to class in the 6th week. She'd baked it at midnight the night before, using a recipe she'd found in a library book, and bananas Jewel had given her that were going brown. She cut it into 12 pieces and set it on the shared table in the study room, where 4 other students, all women, all mothers, all returning after interruptions that had lasted between 3 and 11 years, gathered after lecture to review notes. "I figured, if we're all going to suffer through the musculoskeletal system together, we might as well eat," Tamara said. They laughed. They ate. They studied. And by the 7th week, the study group had a name chosen by a 34-year-old woman named Renee, who was returning to school after leaving an abusive marriage and starting over with nothing but a court order and a determination to become something her daughter could be proud of. They called themselves the Second Chancers. Tamara was becoming slowly, and without announcement, the center of a small orbit, not because she sought it, because she'd been helped, and the first thing she did with the stability was extend it outward, the way a person who'd been drowning and finally touches solid ground, doesn't climb to higher land, but turns around and reaches back into the water. Month 4 broke her. Not all at once. Not dramatically. The way most things break when you're poor and tired, and trying to hold together a life that has too many moving parts and not enough margin for error. It breaks quietly in the space between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., when the apartment is dark and the world is asleep, and you're the only person awake, because sleep is a luxury that requires a mind at rest, and your mind hasn't rested in 4 years. Zuri got an ear infection on a Wednesday, double otitis media both ears, the kind that turns a 4-year-old into a screaming, inconsolable furnace of fever and pain. The pediatrician prescribed amoxicillin $14 with the discount card and 3 days home from daycare. 3 days. 3 days meant Tamara couldn't work the morning shift at the restaurant. One missed shift was $180 she wouldn't see on Friday's check. $180 was groceries for a week and a half. $180 was the margin between making rent and not, and the anatomy midterm was on Friday. Tamara sat on the floor of her apartment at 2 in the morning, with her back against the radiator, the textbook open across her knees, the pages blurring because her eyes had been open for 21 hours. Zuri was asleep on the sofa, the fever broken by 10 o'clock, but the exhaustion lingering in her small body like a tide that hadn't fully gone out. Micah was asleep in the bed curled around a pillow, his backpack already packed for morning, because he was the kind of child who prepared for tomorrow before today was finished. Tamara stared at the diagram of the skeletal system. 206 bones. She could name 142 from memory. She needed all of them by Friday. Her vision swam. Her hands were shaking not from cold, from the particular kind of tremor that comes from running on coffee and adrenaline and the refusal to admit that you've reached a wall. She picked up her phone, scrolled to a name she'd added 3 weeks ago, hesitated, pressed call. Darius answered on the second ring. 2:15 in the morning, and his voice was clear alert, the voice of a man who was sitting at a desk surrounded by shipping manifests and quarterly projections, because sleep was something he'd sacrificed so long ago he'd stopped, counting it as a loss. "I can't do this." Tamara's voice was flat. Not crying, worse than crying. The absence of crying, the sound of a woman who'd used up every drop of emotional fuel and was running on fumes. "I can't be a student and a mother and a worker all at the same time. Something has to give." Darius was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills a phone line like pressure, like the air, before a storm that hasn't decided whether to break or hold. "My mother worked 2 jobs, he said finally. His voice was low, careful, the voice of someone choosing every word like it cost something. "Raised me alone. Never once sat in a classroom after high school. Did you know what she wanted to be? No? A teacher. 4th grade. She used to tell me when I was little. Said she wanted to teach kids how to read, because reading was the only door that stayed open, no matter how many people tried to close it. She had the application for Roxbury Community College in her dresser drawer for 6 years. She never filled it out. She never had time. She was too busy making sure I had time." Silence. "She ran out of time, Tamara. 54 years old, heart failure in a 1-bedroom apartment. She never sat in a classroom. She never stood in front of a room full of 9-year-olds and taught them how a sentence works." He paused. "You still have time. Don't waste hers." The words landed in the dark apartment like stones dropped into still water. Don't waste hers. Not don't waste yours. Hers. The accumulated hours of every mother who'd worked 2 jobs and skipped meals and counted coins and said Mama already ate so her child could have one more chance at something she never got. Tamara didn't respond. She set the phone on the floor beside her, pressed both palms flat against the textbook. The skeletal system stared up at her 206 bones, arranged in the shape of a body that was designed to stand upright even when everything around it collapsed. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, turned to the section on the axial skeleton, and read. She studied until 5 in the morning. 3 hours of silence broken only by the turning of pages and the click of the radiator and the soft breathing of 2 children who would never know that their mother almost quit at 2:15 a.m. on a Thursday in July, and kept going because a man she barely knew reminded her that time was a debt she owed to women who'd never had enough of it. She took the midterm on Friday, scored a B+. Not perfect, not the top of the class, but passing solid earned in the trenches of a life that gave her no margin and demanded everything. When she told Darius the grade on their next call, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your mother would have been proud of that." And for the first time in the conversation, Tamara's composure cracked. Not with sadness, with the particular kind of grief that comes from hearing someone name a person you've been carrying in silence for 6 years. She would have, Tamara whispered. She really would have. March 14th came again the way it always did. Quiet, heavy, the kind of day that sits on your chest before your eyes even open. Darius drove the Honda Civic down Blue Hill Avenue with the windows cracked. Same hoodie, same route, same silence in the car that felt less like absence and more like presence, like someone sitting in the passenger seat who'd been gone for 12 years but never really left. He parked at Oaklawn Cemetery and walked to Plot 47 Section C. The headstone looked the same. Gray granite, Lorraine Marie Kincaid, beloved mother. The grass around it was trimmed because Darius paid a groundskeeper $100 a month to keep it that way, one of the smallest and most important line items in his entire financial life. He placed the chrysanthemums against the stone, white, the cheap ones that lasted. Like us, baby. He sat on the cold ground, the way he did every year, his back against the granite, his knees pulled up, looking out across the rows of headstones that stretched toward the tree line. For 12 years he'd come here and talked about business, about revenue, about expansion plans and quarterly projections and the new distribution center in Memphis. He'd talk about the company because the company was the only language he had left, the only proof he could offer that the years she'd spent counting coins and skipping meals and lying about having already eaten had produced something measurable, something that looked like it was worth the cost. But this year he didn't talk about the company. I met someone, Ma. The wind moved through the cemetery. A bird called from somewhere behind the maintenance shed. She reminds me of you. Same cart, same coins, same lie about already eating. He paused, swallowed. She's got 2 kids, a boy who's too serious for 7 and a girl who sleeps through everything. The boy holds her jacket the way I used to hold yours, like if he let go you'd disappear. He pulled a blade of grass from the ground and rolled it between his fingers. I couldn't save you. I know that. I was 3 years too late and $1 billion too slow. You died in that apartment with $47 in the bank, and I was still trying to figure out how to get a second truck on the road. His voice cracked. Not dramatically, quietly, the way concrete cracks when pressure builds from underneath. But I think maybe that's why I stopped in that Walmart, not because I planned to. Not because I'm generous or kind or any of the things people say about me in magazines. I stopped because the universe put your face on a stranger and dared me to walk past it. And I couldn't. I physically could not walk past your face again. He leaned his head back against the stone. I've been running from this for 12 years, Ma. Building things, buying things, filling up the penthouse with furniture that costs more than our apartment and pretending that's the same as filling up the emptiness. But it's not. You know it's not. You always knew the difference between full and furnished. A car passed on the road beyond the cemetery wall. The sound faded. The quiet returned. I think I've been helping her because I'm trying to help you. And I know that doesn't make logical sense. You're gone. She's not you. But she's living your life, Ma. The same 2 jobs. The same empty fridge. The same smile that says everything's fine while her stomach eats itself. He wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand. If I can't go back and fill your cart, maybe I can fill hers. If I can't sit you down at Gigi's and make you eat the pancakes instead of watching me eat them, maybe I can do it for her. Not as a replacement, as a continuation, as proof that the way you loved me didn't die when you did. He sat there until the sun moved behind the trees and the shadow of the headstone stretched long across the grass. Then he stood up, pressed his palm flat against the cold granite, the way you press your hand against a closed door when you know someone's on the other side, and walked back to the car. He'd built a $4.7 billion company. He'd moved freight across 37 states. He'd been on the cover of Forbes and Bloomberg and every business publication that measured human beings in dollars. But the most valuable thing Darius Kincaid had ever done was pay $43.72 for a stranger's groceries in a Walmart on Blue Hill Avenue, because that was the moment he stopped running from his mother and started running toward her. 14 months after that Thursday, at the checkout line, Tamara Osei walked across a stage at Bunker Hill Community College and received her licensed practical nursing certificate. The auditorium was small. Fluorescent lights, plastic folding chairs, a wooden podium with a microphone that squeaked when you adjusted it. The ceiling tiles had water stains in the corners, and the air conditioning hummed loud enough to compete with the applause. It was not Harvard. It was not a grand ballroom with chandeliers and keynote speakers and alumni donations funding the champagne. But for Tamara standing on that stage in a blue gown she'd ironed at 5 that morning, it was the most important room she'd ever walked into. Micah sat in the front row. 8 years old now, wearing a white button-down shirt Tamara had pressed with the same iron she used for her gown, the collar slightly crooked because he'd buttoned it himself and refused help. He sat straight. He didn't fidget. He watched the stage with those serious brown eyes, and when the announcer called his mother's name, Tamara Naa-Ose, he clapped with both hands above his head, like he was trying to make the ceiling hear. Zuri sat on Jewel Patterson's lap in the second row, 5 years old, now clutching a stuffed cat named Biscuit, whose left ear had been loved to a permanent bend. She clapped when everyone else clapped, not because she understood the significance, but because clapping felt like the right thing to do when Mama was smiling and everyone else was making noise. Darius sat in the third row. Hoodie, jeans, the Vacheron Constantine hidden under his sleeve. Nobody around him recognized him. Nobody looked twice. He was just another guest in a room full of families watching their people cross a stage, and that anonymity was the most comfortable thing he'd worn in years. Tamara walked to the podium. The dean handed her the certificate. She took it with both hands, the same way she'd held the Ziploc bags of coins at Walmart 14 months ago. But this time her hands didn't shake. This time the thing she was holding wasn't a measurement of what she couldn't afford. It was proof of what she could become. She looked out at the audience, found Micah first, then Zuri, then Jewel. Then, 3 rows back, the man in the hoodie who'd paid for her Cheerios with a sentence about his mother and changed the trajectory of her entire life without once making her feel like she owed him anything. Their eyes met. Darius nodded. Small. The kind of nod that carries more than words can hold. After the ceremony, the hallway was crowded with families taking photos, graduates hugging children running between legs. Tamara found Darius near the water fountain, standing apart from the crowd the way he always did, like a man who'd built a life in boardrooms but felt most himself in margins. She didn't say thank you. She'd said it before enough times that the word had begun to feel too small for what it was supposed to contain. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her blue gown and pulled out a small white envelope. "This is for you," she said. Darius took it, opened it. Inside were bills and coins. He counted without thinking, the way you count, when the numbers are already familiar. $43.72. Exact. And a folded piece of paper. Notebook paper, the kind from a composition book. He unfolded it. Tamara's handwriting small and neat. For the next mama who says she already ate. Darius looked at the money, looked at the note, looked at Tamara. His throat locked, his eyes burned. The man who ran a $4.7 billion empire and negotiated contracts with Fortune 500 companies and never not once lost his composure in a business meeting, stood in a community college hallway holding $43.72 and could not speak. Micah appeared from somewhere in the crowd, weaving between adults with the precision of a child who'd learned to navigate tight spaces. He tugged on the hem of Darius's hoodie. "Mr. Darius, Mama says you're coming to dinner, right? She made jollof rice, and she said you have to eat because she knows you skip meals too." Darius looked down at the boy. 8 years old, serious brown eyes, the white shirt slightly crooked. The same boy who'd told his mother he didn't need colored pencils because he understood the math of being loved by someone who couldn't afford to love herself at the same time. Darius laughed. Not the polished boardroom chuckle he used at galas and investor dinners. A real laugh. The kind that breaks loose from a place inside you that hasn't been open in so long you forgot the door existed. The kind of laugh his mother used to pull out of him on Thursday evenings at Gigi's when she'd steal a bite of his pancakes and pretend she hadn't. "Your mama's right," Darius said, his voice thick. "I do skip meals." Tamara was standing at the end of the hallway, Zuri on her hip, Biscuit the cat dangling from Zuri's fist. She watched Darius and Micah walking toward her, the billionaire in the hoodie and the 8-year-old with the crooked collar, and she smiled. "You eat first," this time she called out. "I already ate." And there it was. The same 5 words. Mama already ate. But for the first time, they weren't a lie. They weren't a sacrifice wrapped in a smile designed to protect a child from the weight of what was missing. They were a joke. A real, warm-earned joke between 2 people who knew exactly what those words had cost every woman who'd ever said them and meant the opposite. Darius smiled back, and something in his chest, something that had been frozen since a 1-bedroom apartment on Hancock Street and $47 in a bank account and a woman who gave everything and called it enough, that something finally after 12 years thawed. Darius Kincaid didn't save Tamara Osei. He opened a door she was already strong enough to walk through. The $43.72 wasn't the gift. The gift was being seen, truly seen, by someone who recognized the sacrifice because he'd watched it consume the person he loved most. Sometimes the richest thing you can give someone isn't money. It's not a scholarship or a housing voucher or a seat in a classroom. It's the sentence, "I see what you're doing. It matters. You matter. And you don't have to carry this alone." This story is fictional, but the systems it describes are real. Food insecurity affects 1 in 8 households in America. The national nursing shortage exceeds 200,000 unfilled positions. Section 8. Housing waitlists average 27 months in major cities. Second chance scholarships exist at most community colleges across the country and go unclaimed every year because the people who qualify don't know they exist. Every one of these programs can be found with a single search. Every one of them has the power to change a life if the right person finds them at the right time. I wrote this because I believe the most dangerous lie in poverty isn't "I can't afford it." It's "Mama already ate." It's the lie parents tell so their children never have to feel the weight of what's missing. It's the lie that keeps families functioning while the person holding them together slowly disappears. If you know a parent like that, someone who counts coins, who skips meals, who buys everything for their kids and nothing for themselves, don't look away. Don't walk past. See them. That's where everything starts. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if this story meant something to you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. See you in the next one.